Welcome to Macro Hive Conversations with Bilal Hafeez. We aim to bring you the best macro analysis to help you successfully invest in financial markets. For our latest analysis, visit macrohive.com.
Okay, can we go on to, for all the people, crypto bros out there?
Crypto, yeah.
Yes, as I know, Macro Hive has moved much more into the space over the past year. Maybe give a high level, obviously this could be a whole different podcast in itself, but maybe high level, kind of what your views and.
Yeah, I mean, I think a high level kind of my view on crypto is, obviously I'm coming to this not as a technologist, which obviously a lot of people are, technologists on this side. So I'm coming to this as like somebody who's been in markets for a while and is kind of familiar with sort of cycles and so on. So my sense is there is some real innovation on the technology side with crypto. And I think fundamentally, the most interesting aspect of crypto from a technology perspective is that the ability to assign property rights to digital assets. So in the past, when you're in the digital world, when you're on the web or in gaming or whatever, it's difficult to know who owns that particular asset. And so in the digital economy, if one can term it that, if you're able to have some ability to know who owns that particular set of pixels, or that contract, that's super powerful. And that's a real innovation. And obviously there's a decentralization component of crypto as well. That's very interesting. So I think there's definitely some real technological innovation there. Yep. At the same time, I think it's so early right now, we aren't quite sure what's the best use of that technology. And it reminds me very much of the early days of the internet, where initially there was a lot of what people call skeuomorphism, this complicated word, which basically means that when you basically try to copy the physical world in the digital world, it's called skeuomorphism. So initially, when people
are still using that now,
yeah, exactly. I think that's a fallacy of what the use case will be. So when the internet first was created, like a media company would say, okay, like New York Times or somebody will create a web page, and the web page will look exactly like my print, copy. Now, what we learned was that was not, the final use case. The final use case was actually that New York Times and media companies will be destroyed by social media companies who basically found a way of getting users to generate content on a platform and getting users to post articles of other media companies onto that platform, which completely destroyed traditional media companies. So the end game was not that you'll be able to have a website with a media company and that was the future. The future was actually there'll be something that will completely destroy the media industry through a platform. That was the end game. So we're in that stage right now where I feel like a lot of stuff that's happening in the crypto world is just trying to copy the real world. So a classic one of that is some of the things we're seeing in the virtual world side, Decentraland and all these sorts of things, where you create a world that looks like, roads and buildings, and you're saying, okay, that's like a real estate market, like the real world. Now, while there might be some interest and markets may go up or down and around that all, fundamentally, that's not the end game. In 10 years, that's not going to be where the use case is.
Yeah, I heard from another podcast, they were talking about when Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook were talking about some of their initial thoughts and approach towards Meta, to the Metaverse, and they're saying, well, if it's having two people play chess in the Metaverse, like that's not not really taking advantage of where the technology can provide a very different and a much more fruitful experience.
Absolutely, and I think the point here is that in the end, what you find is that there's a new technology gets invented, it goes out into the wild, lots of people use it, and then somehow something happens, and then you realize actually that's the thing that's going to really sort of take off. And just going back to the Decentraland and these sorts of things, the fundamental problem I have with these virtual world ideas of saying, okay, you can replicate the real world, is that you can't replicate the real world if you can't use all 5 senses of your body. So when you enter these virtual worlds, you're using sight and hearing, but you're not using touch, smell, or taste. And to really get a virtual world, you have to have those things, because when you go to any new city in the world, it's the smells, the tastes, touch, all of these things, that are really, really important. So just saying you can replicate the real world, you can't, So that virtual world will always be subpar. So you'll have to create something else that,
There's other advantages.
Other advantages
Yes.
of that whole space. So that as an side point. The other general point I would make is that things that change the world doesn't mean that that will necessarily make you money.
Right.
So for example, say something like the internet. Like the person who invented the internet, I'm not sure if that person is the richest person from the internet. It's basically all these side things that ended up making money, not necessarily the thing that you think would make money. So if you look at it, or put it another way, we had this massive dot-com crash in 2000, yet the internet did change the world. So right. There was a big run up in value. It collapsed. If you looked at the collapse in value, you think, okay, the internet doesn't mean anything, but it has. It's changed the world. But what happens is when you have the initial technology shock, things go a bit crazy. There's a crash, but that technology does change the world. So that's kind of the other point.
Yeah, I heard an interesting thing where a guy was talking about, say, the internet, and a lot of it was, one of the things was that there was just so much overbuilding of like underwater cables and so much broadband technology and stuff, but like eventually the world moved into that. And his view is just like railroads, that railroads, became a hugely profitable business, but for a long time there was overbuilding. People understood this was a better way to travel. But so that's very interesting to think about.
And then the other kind of related point to this is, and this is more of a challenge to economists and finance theory, is that we don't really understand the digital economy that well, or the platform economy that well. And I think this has been one of the challenges for understanding the valuation of tech companies, where, say, let me give you an example. If you look at the price to book of, say, Facebook, Facebook looks expensive, because what's its assets? It's got some buildings, some computers, but its valuations are like, it's the value of the company is super high. But the asset of Facebook, the true asset, is not the buildings and all of that. It's the fact that it has a 2 billion network. The question is, that 2 billion network, where does that sit on the balance sheet? It's not on the balance sheet anywhere. And right. So from an accounting perspective, like, Facebook is spending money on marketing, which is an operational expense, and that marketing leads to more users coming onto the platform. Rather than viewing that as OPEX, that's actually capital expenditure, because it's actually an expense on building up an asset, which is the users.
Their best asset, yeah.
So actually, there's been a misclassification from an accounting perspective around what their asset is, which is the 2 billion network. And the issue with networks is that there's a non-linearity about network. Having a network of 10 versus 100 is not that 100 is 10 times better. 100 is like 1,000 times better, because you have many more possibilities. And 1,000 to 1,000,000 is not 1,000 times better. It's like 1,000,000 or billion times better. So you end up in this network economics, almost network economy, where to understand the valuation of a tech company, you need to understand the scale of its network and how that leads to what's called a flywheel effect or a network effect. And that's, I think, lots of people who use value to trade in equities have completely missed all of that, and use a traditional value metric, which works really well for widgets, manufacturing, companies. But when you enter the digital realm, everything changes. It's like classical physics versus quantum physics, and that's the issue here, where we're talking about, this sort of digital world where it's kind of unbounded in some ways. And so in that, the reason I mention all of this is that changes what we can think of as things that will have value as well. Because whenever we look at all of these things that people are doing in the crypto world, we think, okay, that looks silly, or that doesn't make sense. But that's how people, may want to, engage in economic activity in that alternative sort of world in different forms.
I know there's a lot of focus on community building. So obviously, Macro Hive, there's a pretty significant community of thousands of users. Do you have any views on this idea, where it seems like a lot of platforms are issuing tokens for their users to get early access to something, to be able to influence through voting rights how the community evolves? What's
Yeah,
your
I mean, I
thought?
think that's a super interesting area. I mean, people call it utility tokens or social tokens. I mean, we're kind of looking at that ourselves. And I think there is something in here around how you can create sort of a relationship with your members where they feel they have a stake in you and they have a say in what you're doing. And so the question is whether issuing a social or utility token is the best way of doing that versus an alternative where you just have like a membership agreement, with people in your membership. I think the nice thing about the social token is that it just makes things more clear on terms of what people can and can't do, and it allows some ability to kind of transfer that membership to other people in a very efficient way. So you kind of get this market kind of dynamic within that all. So I think there is something in it, and I think hopefully we'll do something in this space and understand it better. And I think if you look in the artistic world, like music artists and so on, they're doing some interesting things in this area where, at the moment, if you think about in the music industry, if you're an artist, your music is played on Spotify and you get pennies from Spotify for every time someone plays your track. Now, if you're a super big star like Taylor Swift or Adele, you're able to get a lot of money from Spotify. But if you're in the long tail where you have 1,000 or 2,000 fans, you can't monetize that well. Spotify essentially doesn't give you anything.
Right.
But this social tokens or utility tokens will allow you to have it allows you to disintermediate Spotify, have a direct relationship with your fan. And then the fan could basically say, look, I bought this token for $1,000, say. Same could apply to Macro Hive. And as a result, I get early access to an album or some release of some research or something,
Yep.
or some special webinars or something like that. And there's something appealing, about that all.
Okay. Super interesting.
And actually, one other thing I do want to say about crypto, which, to balance all of this, is that I do think there is a Wild West component to crypto as well, where a lot of shady things are going on as well. And, because of the absence of regulation, and in some ways, lots of things that aren't really allowed in financial markets are happening in crypto markets, whether it's certain large players or whales influencing the market, in ways that wouldn't be allowed in financial markets, or ways of exaggerating the amount of volumes that are on platforms,
Right.
through kind of wash trades and those sorts of things. So there is a whole kind of side of it that is, quite negative, which you need to kind of balance it up. That there is a lot of stuff that's going on, which in some ways is regulatory arbitrage.
Okay, so you're thinking about things. You want to understand. You're looking to understand where the opportunities are, where the people are utilizing things in the most interesting ways, say like utility tokens, social tokens, NFTs around helping contributors or artists, musicians, and how that could benefit them. But also at the same time, thinking about helping investors also even just to better understand price action, and obviously a lot of institutional investors we know are looking more into the space, and you're building a lot of tools and frameworks around that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're really trying to approach crypto in kind of, as I don't want to use sort of scientific as too kind of
financially rigorous.
Yeah, financially rigorous way, where we want to understand this, and we want to make sure that we try to understand the long-term dynamics of all of this, and we don't want to get too caught up in kind of these get rich quick schemes within all of this, and try to kind of dissect it all and apply. For me in general, I think there's this interesting thing where there's a lot of new entrants into the crypto market, but the level of financial sophistication is very low. So there's lots of people who talk about crypto prices and crypto markets, yet the way they talk about the market price action and just the way things are done, it's very unsophisticated. I mean, there's people who've been in markets will kind of understand market dynamics in a way that you can apply it then to crypto, and that's a very powerful kind of combination.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I would assume a lot of clients are thinking, liking that Macro Hive is making a much bigger presence in this field, because understanding the historical experience of how to approach markets and how to overlay a lot of those skills into the crypto market. So one other thing, I guess last thing we were going to talk in general was, I know the team does this thing called Gray Swans. By the way, I didn't know what a Gray Swan was before, but I know we've been doing it for 2 years, and it's always kind of one of the most popular things that we produce and get a lot of like funny, interesting kind of topics and explore some. Well, why don't you explain a little bit what a Gray Swan is?
So we've been doing this for a couple of years. I actually started doing this when I was at Nomura, actually, Gray Swans, and it's super popular with clients. And the idea is, people know about black swans, what Nassim Taleb popularized, which is these really unexpected events that have a massive impact on everything. And so that, by its very nature, we can't predict, because if you're predicting it, then it's in the realms of the known, it's like the unknown unknown, known unknowns, and the Rumsfeldian kind of phrase that the Rumsfeldian phrase. So a gray swan is somewhere in between. So gray swans are events that we can imagine, but are unlikely to happen. But if they do happen, they'll have a big impact. So what we're saying is, we're not being so bold to say that we can predict black swans, which are just completely unexpected, but we can try to look at gray swans. So these are tail risk events, kind of to broaden our imagination of what could happen next year. So we've been doing this every year.
Standard deviation kind of.
Yeah, so it's like a multiple standard deviation event. And so, we've come up with 12 or 13, and I won't talk about all of them, but, a few of them, I think, are quite interesting, which I'll just share now. So one is that this is our number one gray swan, is that the US enters a recession next year. Now, nobody's looking for a recession in the US next year. So what we've done is we've said, okay, like, what things would need to happen for the US to enter a recession next year? And it turns out that two of the best predictors of US recessions are Fed raising interest rates and oil price shocks, i.e. when oil prices like double. And what's happened recently? Oil prices have doubled. Last year oil was trading negative, and now we're at like $70, $80, and the Fed is hiking. So almost always when you have those two kind of things happening around the same time, the US almost always enters a recession. So you could see a scenario, and you throw into the mix that China's a bit weaker as well, the Omicron virus, then you could see a scenario where suddenly the US loses momentum and you enter into a recession. You have to remember, Japan just had a negative quarter of growth, just this past quarter. So it's not outside the realms of possibility. So that's one. Another one, which is kind of on the other side, is what happens if COVID just disappears? So what happens if this Omicron virus is such that it's not so dangerous, it becomes endemic, and it's just like a flu, and then COVID completely goes away. And so that's something on the other side.
Let's hope.
Another one that's going back to the crypto theme is that we have one which talks about how crypto destroys Facebook, kills Facebook. So this idea being that what Facebook's big advantage is that all users and creators go to Facebook. But what crypto does is it says, actually, you don't need to go to a Facebook anymore. You can directly go to your users who now have a stake in what you're doing through decentralization and crypto and so on. So, and this is one of the
I'm sure they're thinking about that.
Yeah, and I would say that one of the things people mix up when they think about crypto is they think that it's Silicon Valley that's behind crypto, and it's not. The interesting about crypto is it wasn't invented by Silicon Valley. It was actually, we don't actually know who Satoshi is, but it's not a Silicon Valley story. It's kind of around the world story, Asia, all these like Russian Canadians and so on. But big tech is actually in opposition to crypto. I mean, it challenges the big tech model. So when I kind of hear about in the US all these regulators or politicians saying, okay, we've got to bring down big tech, rather than thinking about regulation, the thing to do would be to really turbocharge crypto, because crypto is a disruptor of big tech. And I think that's something that, could be interesting. And then the other kind of really more kind of fun and almost silly ones are, one that's kind of close to my heart is football. We have
soccer,
soccer,
but
as it's
I'm learning with my son.
American audience. So we have one gray swan which will come out soon. is we have a Manchester United fan who's written this, who says that Manchester United will win the Champions League. So Manchester United was a once great team. It's had a terrible season so far. They've changed managers. They're doing terribly in the league. They've got Ronaldo, but it's not really working. But what happens if Manchester United win the Champions League? And it could work because Ronaldo does very well in the Champions League. They need to make one or two changes to the team and they could end up winning it. And then the other one, I have to also say, I'm a Liverpool fan, by the way, so I don't want that crazy one to occur. We also have John Turex writing a US one where, Andrew, you'll have to help me with this, but he's going to write one on the Jets winning the Super Bowl. So from my understanding, the Jets is the New York-based football team, which just doesn't seem to win anything ever. Have they ever won the Super Bowl? Or I don't think
they've definitely won one, and I think that they got to another one. It was like 1969, Joe Namath. 68, 69. But listen, they have a good defense. They have a good young quarterback, but I have a feeling that's close to a black swan even for next year. I think Man United is probably close.
Yeah, actually, John said that's even blacker than a black swan. So I told him that's like a black hole swan. It absorbs all
I would
light.
say Grace, my favorite team, the Los Angeles Chargers, maybe if they win it, which they could. They're like a middle of the road. So
okay.
Okay, that's super interesting, and everyone should definitely check out the Gray Swans. We may even have a webinar kind of talking about all of those together.